Simcha, celebration of life.
Welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm your host, Eitan Berger. Hedy Davis, historian and curator of the traveling exhibition Muizenberg Shtetl by the Sea, spent her childhood summers swimming in the Muizenberg Sea and developed a lifelong love for the village. In a new series entitled Stories from Muizenberg, Hedy takes us on a tour of this sleepy little shtetl or village, revealing all its secrets and the history behind it all.
You may remember the Memories of Muizenberg exhibition. I was the historian, the researcher, and the editor of that exhibition. I felt that the exhibition only touched the surface of the story of Muizenberg. There was just so much more to it. And while the exhibition was done on 110 memoirs, subsequently I helped 400 people write their memoirs. So that has been a work of art in itself. And from these 500 memoirs, every line in this book comes from someone's memoir. And I feel so indebted to these people. They were so generous. The photographs they gave us, the stories they gave me. There are stories in this book that no Muizenberger has ever heard. The stories of the Balabostas. A Balabosta is a Jewish woman with great virtue and great panache and determination and will, and she will create a home wherever she goes. And a Balabosta's home is the best home of them all. In Muizenberg, there were several. They were either widows or they were war widows, women who had to make a living. And they started by letting out one room, and then it was 2 rooms, and then they had a little boarding house. And in Muizenberg at the height, about end of 1949-50, there were 100 hotels and boarding houses in this little village that only had a community of 1,000 people, of which just under half were Jewish. At that time, Muizenberg was known as Jewsenberg. Some people still think it was offensive, but really, even Jewish people used that term for their own village because they loved it so much. The first people who came there were Jewish. That was by chance. That was Isidore and Rosa Hirsch, and they came from Germany, and they were there in 1880 when there was absolutely nothing more than an inn. That inn they bought, and Rosa turned it around. She made it beautiful, and by 1883 the Weinberg Times gave her a wonderful write-up in their newspaper and said it was a wonderful hotel. It could stand anywhere in the world. It was so excellent. Just a few meters down the road from the synagogue, we come to the intersection of Atlantic Road and Main Road, Muizenberg. Across the way to our right is the place where Farmer Peck stood, the very first hotel that Isidore Hirsch bought. It was a tiny little inn, and its position was perfectly situated on the little stream that runs down from the mountain 365 days of the year. It was a watering point. That was where he developed that first hotel, and eventually it became the Grand. Across the way, where Checkers is today, that is where he built a beautiful hotel known as Hirsch's Temperance Hotel. That became the Marine Hotel. So as you came into Muizenberg, this little Isidore Hirsch from Germany, who knew very little about anything, had picked the 2 prime positions, and he made his money here, and then he left. 1882, the train reached Muizenberg. So Hirsch had timed his arrival, 1800, very well. He was there. Soon after came the railway line. The one thing about Muizenberg, from the very beginning, it is the first point along the coast where people can go to swim. And they flocked to Muizenberg from the very beginning, 9,000 people on a Sunday during the summer. And when they arrived there, who was there to greet them, selling baskets of food? Mr. and Mrs. Hirsch. They had hampers ready. And eventually he got the control of the little cottage at the railway station, and he had a cafe there, which he had for quite a long time. 1900, the people coming to Muizenberg were probably a good mix, mostly Gentile. When did the Jewish invasion arrive? That came a little bit later. In fact, 1920, there were quite a few hotels already, quite a few boarding houses. There was only one kosher establishment, and that was the Kricklers. They took these two little semi-detached cottages, and there they had a place they called the Transvaal Hotel. Now, most old-timers told me it was called the Transvaaler, but then one day I found a letterhead. It was the Transvaal Hotel. Originally, the Kricklers built this hotel in the distance. It was a two-story, but it was too small, so they've added another story and a lift, and they put a big sign in the lift, not to be used on the Sabbath. After the Kricklers came the Gottliebs, the Hirschlers. Eventually, it came to the parents of Hilary Fischhoff. Hilary Fischhoff was the last owner of that hotel. And to try and make a success of it in the 1890s, she changed the name to the Hotel Shrimpton and ran it on a completely different basis. She had which fast became the most sought-after restaurant in Cape Town. She was the first hotelier to get a Chain de Retisseurs for her wonderful cooking. Like the wife of Isidor Hirsch 100 years earlier, it was the cuisine that brought people to Muizenberg.
The wealthy and the poor used Muizenberg as a holiday resort, with the town boasting stunning seaside homes and 7 big hotels. Unfortunately, the hotels are now gone, but there are numerous buildings of great architectural value, reflecting both Edwardian and Victorian styles.
Other stories about early Muizenberg that are lovely are the stories about the menus. Hotels try to outdo one another. Eating a meal in Muizenberg was a banquet. These little old ladies would get up in the morning. They'd have their stewed fruit, they'd have their porridge, they'd have a nice egg dish. There would always be haddock, or there would be something else on the menu, delicious. They eat the lot. Mid-morning there was tea, of course, with little sandwiches. Came lunchtime in the middle of the day, the heat of the day, there they sat eating a full 8-course meal. And they left out nothing. And when they wanted a piece of chicken, the waiter went to the box corner there and said, "Chicken for Mrs. Cohen." And the lady behind there knew exactly which portion Mrs. Cohen would like. So being a hotelier was hard work. You had to know your customers very intimately. You had to provide a variety of food. And of course, in the evening, the meal was usually milchig. One of the hotels that I have talked about in great detail is the Imperial, because that is one of the hotels that was most popular with Johannesburg clientele. And that it was run by the Balabosta of them all. Her name was Feigelaya Kosofer. And she knew how to really run a big hotel. Now, where did she learn to do this? She started in the gardens with a 2-bedroomed little house. She eventually owned Kraft Chicks guest house, and she moved all the way up the ladder. She built the Imperial Hotel, having put down a cash deposit. This is the original Imperial Hotel that Mrs. Kosofer built first. She had to remove a mountain of sand that stood here because it was the last vacant stand. And people had dumped their sand over here, so that had to be removed first. And she had to borrow money to pay for it originally. Then she built the Imperial Court next door. She tore down a very ugly grey building that was there. It was a ghostly house. It was still large. She pulled it down and she built the block of flats. You know that she built this during the war years when you weren't allowed to build anymore. And how she got permission was that the flats after the war would be available to ex-servicemen. Except when they came back from the war, they didn't want to live in Muizenberg. So she was lucky. She had plenty of accommodation when the height of the season was on, and people would stay here and have their meals next door at the hotel. Most of the hotels were run by little women who taught themselves everything they had to know about running a hotel. And then in the late 40s, early 50s, arrived a family from Johannesburg, Mr. Litvin, who announced that he would run the ultimate kosher hotel. What experience did he have? He'd been a shochet. He was able to slaughter kosher chickens. And he built 2 kitchens, and he announced that his was the most kosher hotel of them all. One year, some young family came for Pesach, and they had just arrived and settled into their room when there was a knocking on the door. There was Mr. Litvin with a little pan and a feather. He'd come to clean the room for Pesach. And before he left, he turned to them and he said, "There's a cow outside. We are feeding it special grass for Pesach. Don't feed it anything or the milk will not be kosher." You can imagine when he left, they had a good giggle. He actually left Muizenberg in 1956. I don't know, did he see the writing on the wall or had he just had his run? The hotel was not very near the beach. It was almost on False Bay Station. But he'd had a good run. He was there quite a few years. Behind me is the Balmoral Hotel, perhaps the last elegant bit of the Art Deco era for which Muizenberg is renowned. The concrete pavilion would have stood across the way, the pavilion that everybody misses so much, except they don't remember that at the time it was smelly and musty and dirty. The Balmoral Hotel was built in 3 parts by a man who had great foresight. He saw this as the most important stand in the whole of Muizenberg. And so he first began building on the far corner where he could afford to build. But he didn't like what the architect was doing, so he changed architects. He managed to buy the rest of the stand across to the seaside and then built the ground floor. And afterwards, the whole building was built. It doesn't look quite as it did in its heyday, but it is going to have a new restoration, and hopefully that will be more pleasing to the eye. When you say Muizenberg to most people our age, the one thing they remember is the snake park. That was the in place. The snake park, or the snake pit as it had become known. It was incredible how many youngsters could pack into that triangle. The entire Jewish youth of Cape Town, plus all the visiting talent, were photographed there each New Year's Day, and upward of 1,000 youngsters could be counted, all standing upright and squashed like sardines in the photograph that traditionally appeared on the front page of the Cape Argus for several summers. There simply was no place to sit down, and who cared? They were young, and they were meeting up with other Jewish youngsters, and many a romance began between 2 young people who had literally bumped into each other on that hot-packed beach. But many young couples who met on the sands of Muizenberg lived happily ever after. For even more, it was simply a summer romance, accompanied by the crooning of Pat Boone's Love Letters in the Sand. Who can forget the sweet melancholy of the words? Or maybe it was Elvis Presley's Love Me Tender that became your personal theme song.
Simcha, the celebration of life. Simcha, the celebration of life.
Change purely for the sake of change is never wise, but measured change, seeking to move from mediocrity to excellence, is most satisfying. This, happily, is the story of Miracle Drive and Chabad House. From small beginnings, Miracle Drive has probably become the single largest fundraiser in the country and continues to accept its responsibility to change for the good the lives of individuals and communities. Our Simcha team were privileged to join the Miracle Drive team at Malachi Informal Settlement north of Johannesburg, which is one of the beneficiaries of the Miracle Drive fundraising campaign.
When When you live in a country where millions of people are living in squalor, we have to do something to help everybody. So we started with a program called Grow Your Life. It was books aimed at kids between 11 and 14. Just each story was giving them a dream. It was helping improve their reading skill and giving them a dream on how to better their lives. And I think we've distributed about 300,000 books in that program. And one thing led to another. Then we started a job creation program. Then someone made us aware of this informal settlement called Malachi. It's probably the poorest of the settlements in the north of Johannesburg. I mean, there's no electricity here, there's no water, there's no running water, and there's no ablution. And we felt, it's just a 15-minute drive from Johannesburg. Let's start working in this area. So the first thing we did was we started a feeding program for kids, and that's been going on for about a year and a half. And then we opened up a library. The library is aimed at children, but children of all ages. Anybody who wants to read wants to improve their reading skill and learn. And the library is open from 3 to 6.
Sifoy has seen his neighbor selling some sweets. Some sweets again. And when on his way home from school, I need 15 rand for bread and milk, and that's all I have.
I'm Nelson Manua. I born in Midland, Soweto, Zone 6 in 1965. We started building a small classroom whereby we were accommodating only 2 kids. This class now is growing from this year, whereby we have 47 kids. When a Miracle Drive joining us,
the Rabbi organized a container for us and some more sort of books. So we have been so much involved with the community of this library. They've also helped some students, and it's also guide them during the exams. So the library have done a lot for us.
From the library that we started here, we're opening up in the next few months another 6 libraries, and then followed by another 5. So in the next 2 months you can expect another 6 libraries to open. And it's a challenging program, but we cannot live in a country where you have people who can't read around us. We're not doing anything to help. So with little effort, we've initiated this program, and it's working well. It's working unbelievably, actually. There's an old Jewish saying that if you drop books and you drop gold, pick up the books first, because gold has its value, but learning is priceless. The key to success starts with teaching a kid, with educating a kid, with a kid loving education. When a kid starts to read, they start to better their lives. It starts to affect every area of their life. And that's really what we're trying to do.
So the main idea here, we start with crutches, giving them food, giving them the resources. After completing that, the question have arrived to us. Children now are attending crutches. What else can we do for them? Now we decide about the library.
So Malachi, I think, is about 5,000 people. I think there are 1,000 shacks. Very challenging for the people who live here. Some people have garden patches, vegetable patches, but generally people are battling here. The government says, if I'm not mistaken, that the people here will be moved by the year 2024, if I'm not mistaken. But in the meantime, these people are facing major challenges. So the first thing that we did here was we started a feeding program for children. And every single day we're feeding the kids in the nursery schools.
What we do is we pack 30 sachets per child per box. So each child has 1 sachet a day.
We normally getting the different food parcels, yeah, whereby the other one is a soft porridge in small packet, in a small